Hey everyone, Brendan Snyder here. How are you? Thanks so much for joining me and welcome to a special review for Iron Maiden frontman Bruce Dickinson and his album More Balls to Picasso. So this is a reimagining of his second solo album that was originally released in 1994, now getting an updated treatment with some embellishments, a remix, all that sort of stuff. It just came out on July 25th of 2025. I'm going to break it all down. I'll do a comparison with the original one and we can see and feel what the differences are about this. But before we get into it, if you're new to my channel and you haven't already hit the subscribe button, please do. Also leave a comment, hit like, all those things do help support my channel. I'd greatly appreciate it. And of course, as an added bonus, by turning on notifications, you'll never miss an episode and stay up to date on really cool things like this, where we're talking about the brand new More Balls to Picasso Bruce Dickinson album, the reimagining of it. So, first and foremost, Bruce Dickinson originally fronted the new wave of British heavy metal band Samson, and he recorded 2 albums with them before splitting off and joining fellow new wave of British heavy metal band Iron Maiden and going on to even bigger successes over there. Now, during Bruce's original run with the band between 1981 and 1993, he recorded 7 studio albums. And prior to the band's 8th studio album, No Prayer for the Dying, Bruce released his debut solo album, Tattooed Millionaire, in 1990. And this was 4 months before they would release No Prayer for the Dying. So at the time, when Bruce decided to do this was something where he was still in the band. But later, when he begins to work on this album, he's already decided to leave Iron Maiden. And so ultimately what would become the Balls to Picasso album gets started early on. And it's a real departure from the debut studio album from Bruce Dickinson, as well as anything he had done with Iron Maiden. And the album would go through many different phases of development. The first phase, he would be recording with British band Skin, having that band back him up. He thought it sounded too much like the debut, so he moved away from that and began a second recording with famed producer Keith Olsen, and that album is often referred to as his Peter Gabriel album. Later on, this, which is a deluxe edition, having a bonus second disc in it, you get those songs, those Keith Olsen collaborated songs. So if you want to know what that Peter Gabriel sounding album is, that's where you can check that out at least. And the third and final phase of recording, he hooked up with Roy Z and his band Tribe of Gypsies, which ultimately led to the 1994 album Balls to Picasso. But Bruce always felt that that album was a bit of a Frankenstein, having gone through 3 different attempts at recording an album, ultimately piecing together from those different sessions what ultimately became the album. So he's always wanted to revisit it, and that's ultimately what's happening here. Now, on a little side note, the album wasn't always called Balls to Picasso. In fact, it was originally called Laughing in the Hiding Bush after one of the songs that's on the album, and the artwork was drawn up by Storm Thurgeson, but they couldn't afford it. So ultimately, the artwork would later turn up by the band Anthrax on their Stomp 442 album. So Bruce went into a bathroom, he took out a Sharpie, he drew 2 squares on the bathroom wall and wrote Balls to Picasso, and I assume that was in reference to Storm Thurgeson, and here we are. We have the new version of this album now called More Balls to Picasso. So let's talk about this. Now, the original version of this album sounded heavy, it was sparse. All the songs, for me at least, sounded somewhat the same. They didn't really have a lot of different feel to them. Now, for this new 2025 mix, the empty spaces have been filled in fact, almost to the point that it's too much. Bruce said that he did re-record some of the guitar parts on here. He wanted to make the guitars sound heavier. And I'm not really sure how that's even possible. I always thought the guitars were very heavy, but he didn't feel so some of the guitars got beefed up in terms of this. However, I actually would have done the opposite. I think I would have pulled back on the guitars a bit. The album itself has a very 90s feel. The original album has a very 90s feel to it. And I think if I were trying to make a more universal mix of the album, I would have done the opposite. But I will say that the lead guitar on here actually sounds much better on the 2025 mix than the original 1994 version of it. And overall, the album has a much more theatrical feel to it, more grandeur, more gravitas, all of that sort of stuff. It's less in your face, but at the same time, it is full on. And I think it helps give each of the songs on here its own space to live in. And so I'm ending up liking the direction that went. Even though all the space has been filled in on it, it all creates for a much more interesting listen on here. When I first heard the original version of the album back in 1994, when that came out, I thought it was quite jarring. It didn't sound like the debut. It didn't sound like Iron Maiden, but of course we know that the era dictated a lot of that. And the original version of the album was one of those ones that I always really wanted to like it. There were certain songs that really stood out on it, like Change of Heart, Tears of a Dragon. Those were fantastic no matter what. But the album as a whole never really grabbed me, and it was one of those ones I pulled out over the years, always trying to give it another listen to see if it would just finally do its thing and finally click. And I think now with the 2025 mix, the added embellishments, the re-recorded parts of the guitar, there's some added horns in here, there's the added orchestration, really creates a much more complex listening experience for the listener that I think really adds to it and has made it more interesting for me as a whole. And those added orchestration parts on here really work well, but I think even best on those slower songs like the two that I just mentioned, Change of Heart and Tears of a Dragon, which really, no matter which version of the album, the original or this new More Balls to Picasso, is great on here. And so there's no new edits to the songs. They're all the same length. They vary by a few seconds, but I think that just has to do with the fade in, fade out sort of stuff. So all in all, the album is still the same songs. It's just been embellished in a number of different ways and then gotten that remix. So let's take a peek at this thing. Here's the cover. Of course, we have essentially the original, but the original being of two different, I think that's actually the original album cover. They did a number of different shoots for it, so a slightly alternate version there. I remember them doing that at the time. This is the 2 CD reissue. And they simply just made it look like they've taped the word more over that to achieve that. And we get the back side here, and of course, a little bit different than that, but there's the original one with the blue. So again, we're still keeping with all of that. And when we open this thing up, what's cool is we get a bunch of other versions of alternates, which any of those, I guess, could have been the album cover in here. And of course, this was used for the Shoot All the Clowns CD single, so that's where that comes from. And of course, we just saw it there. So we're seeing all of those things there, and this being the other side. So cardboard package release, there's our CD right here, no sleeve for it specifically. Let me pop that back in and pull out the booklet that's in here. So the booklet's a very cool part of this thing. We get that whole history where I talked about the 3 different attempts at recording this album. He goes into a lot of great detail in the booklet here on that. That's what all this is. We get photos from throughout those different sessions with the different people who were involved in it. It wraps up nicely there, talks a little bit about the extras and stuff, the embellishments that were done. And then we get some other cool photos. We also get the singles releases and 7 inches and stuff like that. And we get all the lyrics in here. So the booklet is really done up right in here, especially when you're getting one that has all of these changes and things to it. You kind of want that stuff, and I'm really glad to say that they provided it here. They didn't shortchange us on it, and that makes me very happy as a physical CD purchasing person, not just a streamer, to get that extra stuff. So bottom line, it seems to be very fashionable these days for these artists to remix or embellish albums to finish it off the right way. Remember, I mentioned that Bruce never felt that the album really came together the way that he would have liked. He always called it a bit of a Frankenstein. And so that's really what he was trying to do here, was to take this and mix it down and embellish it and bring it all together now that he actually has the time and the energy and probably even the money to do it, which he certainly didn't have back at that time. But this recording here, certainly I don't think is meant to replace the original. It's just another version that we as fans get to hear on it. And so 31 years on from the original release of the album, Bruce has now revisited it, sprucing it up, adding a fresh coat of paint. I mean, David Coverdale has done it for Whitesnake, and a lot of other bands have done it, whether just straight remixings like Jethro Tull and Yes and Black Sabbath, all doing remix albums out there. Bruce is getting into that, and I wouldn't be surprised if somewhere down the road Iron Maiden gets into it too. But I think all of the things that were done for this album here really add to the new version of this. And as I said, I don't think it's meant to replace it, but for me at least, I think I prefer the new 2025 version of the album. I never really connected with that 1994 version when it came out, and I have to say, upon first listen of this, it connected with me right away. It felt more cohesive and more together than that previous album as a whole. So additionally, regarding this album here, the original version of it, and I think it goes beyond being just a curiosity having this new mix of the album. I think that it's one that all Bruce Dickinson fans should check out. It's so much more than just, as I said, that curiosity, being a remix, being an embellishment. It is an entirely new way to hear that album, Balls to Picasso. And so certainly I recommend it. I think you guys should check it out. Who knows? You too may decide that it is your definitive version. And there you go. That is my review for the new Bruce Dickinson More Balls to Picasso album review. I hope you've enjoyed it. Certainly, if you've chosen to pick this album up and you've given it a listen, let me know your thoughts on it. Which version do you like? The original 1994, or do you like the new 2025 version? Weigh in.